Test. Well, you were a dancer and I was a rag. The song in my head, it was all that I had. Hope was a letter we never could send, and love was a country we couldn't defend. Okay. No, not that one. Around with my head in the night sky, I hear your voice dancing in the wind, feel your touch on my skin, and all I have is you right there. Well, you were a dancer and I was a rag. The song in my head, it was all that I had. Hope was a letter we never could send, and love was a country we couldn't defend. You've got a friend in me. You've got a friend. So, I need you to sit like right here, and then face me with the lyrics.
Hello, everyone. I think we'll try to get started in just a few minutes, so if you would go ahead and take your seats. Thank you.
Uh, 1414 is my pass.
What?
1414. Cool.
Speakers.
Okay. What's up? Should I have water? She's a little bit parched. Is that Matthew's laptop? No, this is Benedict.
That's an accident waiting to happen right there. I wouldn't sit that there. It'll fall.
This?
Yeah,
Or this?
it'll get tipped and it'll
Oh.
fall. So are y'all just going to bring people up when it's time for them to speak? Are y'all just going to bring people up when it's time for them to speak, or do we want them to come to the front and sit?
They'll come up. 'Cause
Okay,
we're gonna-
that's fine. That's fine. Yeah, that's fine. Just wanted the plan. So go ahead and start whenever you're ready.
I have to sit in front of Matthew whenever he moves up. So whenever they move his chair, I'm gonna hold the lyrics. So I'll just move one of the chairs over to you.
And I think Hannah will just take a 5-minute intermission.
Okay. 5 minutes, not 10. I just found out the ambassador is my uncle.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He's like, oh, I know you're Gemma. I was like, oh, he's like, yeah. And then I was like, yeah. I'm telling you, girl, we all just related to everybody. Okay, so where is that? Right here. So it's gonna be 5. 5 minutes. Yeah.
Testing. Oh, hello everyone. If I could get everyone to please find their seats so we can get started. And for those in the back, there are seats up here that have programs, handkerchiefs, and tea light candles that you will be needing later. So if you do want to grab one of those from an empty seat, you can do so or move forward, whichever is your preference. Okay. Well, Yahweh and warm greetings to everyone here today. My name is Marcina Langarin, and with me is Corinne Salter. We acknowledge the traditional lands of the Lenape-Hoking homeland of the Lenape people and want to acknowledge their ongoing contributions. The Lenape people are active in preserving their culture and heritage through ceremonies, language education programs, and community service. We also acknowledge our traditional leaders, Iro Dinalaboro, Rigagim Karen Rigagiro, Her Excellency Dr. Hilda Sihaine, His Excellency Ambassador John Silk, our people in the Republic of the Marshall Islands, as well as our distinguished speakers, panelists, and nuclear affected frontline community members. We also acknowledge the permanent mission of the Republic of the Marshall Islands to the United Nations for this collaboration. On behalf of the Marshalls Education Initiative, Como Dada, thank you for spending your afternoon with us here today.
Yahweh. This year, March 1st, marks the 71st anniversary of the Castle Bravo detonation, the largest nuclear weapon tested by the United States at Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands. This date also aligns with the observance of the 37th Nuclear Victims Remembrance Day, which is commemorated annually in the Marshall Islands and other parts of the world. Its purpose is to honor the victims and survivors of the U.S. nuclear testing program in the Marshall Islands, while also promoting a comprehensive understanding of the nuclear legacy and its ongoing consequences. It is customary that we start any event with a prayer. We would like to invite Pastor Paul Swington to lead us.
Let us pray. Church yar. Yoro kemi judo gaman mejam. Ilo elegan rally ben rainin kemich. Rewo jangan yuk enoto ke kuchonani chin minotum cholok. Kemich kamolo lo bo yoroch. Minotum jejerech ilo luburin bem. Aji waji ni namu bendron ilo am kagemi miseranio. Yoroch ar marangun modalok. Pahamugo ilo ailang koam. Yoroji char. Bagonich beribam rainin menodam jalak kom kemini kanono gagi chenchinon yenin mai chamologin kemi jidok imreo jangan yok enoto ke kuchonani jin menodam jech aje woj menodam jech ilo luburin bemu yuroch kamane boy bu jojo aman romak bu ilo amni ji pendron kajaram mane am en yodal giyom en rin kemi char parchonalen ilo dan chemen ne jinim cherp ko jar jaram kom molot amen and amen.
Como tada, Pastor. We would like to invite you all to please stand with us as we sing the Republic of the Marshall Islands anthem, led by Matthew John, Program Specialist at MEI and member of the Marshallese Band, Mark Harmony, and Marcina Langrin, Operations Coordinator at MEI.
Ailenyoa meramin mor elden peinanis ilyo imwas kezelet keskenizin sigur emor isamini laksenin alemoren anizan rosemem wonageim kesraman ailein keinar.
You may all be seated. We would now like to invite Benedict Kabua Madison, Executive Director for MEI, for some opening remarks.
Your Excellencies, nuclear frontline communities, friends and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, Yahweh, greetings to you all. It is an honor to welcome you all to the 37th Nuclear Victims Remembrance Day, a national holiday observed in the Marshall Islands and other parts of the world, including for the first time here in New York City. We gather to honor the victims and survivors of the United States nuclear testing program in the Marshall Islands. Although these nuclear tests took place between 1946 and 1958, their effects continue to persist. We see this in the illnesses that afflict our bodies, the waste and radiation contaminating our lands and waters, and the dispossession and displacement that impact our indigenous cultural identity. Today, we will explore the nuclear testing program's numerous health, environmental, and cultural consequences. Since 1946, nuclear weapons tests have affected 6 generations of Marshallese people. While most of the first-generation survivors of these nuclear tests have passed on, we are nearing the point where we will meet the 7th generation within this decade. This is the first time NVRD is being held here in New York City, but it is not the first event of its kind. The Marshallese Educational Initiative has been hosting this commemorative event annually since its founding in 2013, and addressing the nuclear legacy is central to our organization's mission. We are dedicated to addressing the ongoing impact of the nuclear legacy on the health, environment, and culture of the Marshallese people, which is exacerbated by people's socioeconomic status. Our initiatives include nuclear and climate awareness campaigns, the promotion of traditional culture and educational achievement, health education, policy advocacy, and connecting community resources. We work to support Marshallese communities in overcoming the challenges and barriers resulting from the U.S. nuclear testing program. This event brings together nuclear-affected community members to educate about the consequences of nuclear weapons development, use, testing, while promoting ongoing dialogue about disarmament and human rights for impacted communities. It is important to recognize that the United States does not bear sole responsibility for the ongoing ramification of its nuclear testing program in the Marshall Islands. In 1947, following the commencement of nuclear weapons tests, the Marshall Islands were placed under a trusteeship by the United Nations and administered by the United States without the consent of the Marshallese people. This arrangement, known as the Trust Territory of the Pacific Islands, granted the United States exclusive rights to conduct nuclear weapons testing in the Marshall Islands. As a result, the United Nations also plays a role in this legacy, which is fitting to host NVRD here in the city where the United Nations is headquartered and on the eve of the third meeting of states parties on the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. In recent years, the United Nations has officially recognized its responsibility to address the significant and ongoing challenges the Marshallese people face. This acknowledgement is specifically outlined in the 2022 Human Rights Council Resolution 5135, which we will discuss in the panel. The long-term objective is to ensure the United Nations officially recognizes Nuclear Victim Remembrance Day as an annual event. I hope the Marshall Islands government will secure a UN resolution sponsored and introduced by the RMI Permanent Mission. We could create a lasting commemoration that underscores the United Nations' role in addressing the RMI's nuclear legacy. This resolution would also highlight the international community's unwavering commitment to the abolition of nuclear weapons, reinforcing our shared responsibility for a safer future. The inadequate response to historical and intergenerational harms is a persistent and deafening racial injustice. Marshallese people deserve a future in which their human rights are fully recognized so that they may live in dignity, receive reparations for past and ongoing harms, and deserve the remediation of ancestral lands. Addressing past damages and their ongoing effects is necessary to ensure a better future for the Marshallese people. Not only are we here to memorialize nuclear testing, foster healing, and enhance global awareness of the nuclear legacy, but today's panel will highlight historic efforts to address these damages in pursuit of nuclear justice and recent efforts by civil society and the Marshallese government to realize transitional and nuclear justice. I hope these efforts will serve as blueprints for other nuclear frontline communities' quest for nuclear justice. I wish to take this opportunity to thank His Excellency Ambassador John Silk and his team at the Permanent Mission of the Marshall Islands to the United Nations for their support and collaboration with the Marshallese Educational Initiative to host this momentous occasion. I would also like to thank the Marshall Islands National Nuclear Commission, Nuclear Truth Project, Plowshares, and Prospect Hill for their support. Now, we will begin our commemoration to honor victims and survivors. Thank you.
Thank you, Benedict. Our next guest speaker is Paul Griego, a radiochemistry health physics technician who played a key role in the 1977 through 1980 Marshall Islands atomic cleanup. Please help me welcome Mr. Paul Griego.
Great, thank you, Komatara. And it's quite an honor to be invited here to be able to speak with a crowd that has such an interest and unfortunately has been affected. Many of the communities have been affected by radiation and the toxic legacy it leaves behind. In 1978, I was one of the young men and teenagers tasked with the futile atomic cleanup in Anahuac Atoll. So I worked in the Marshall Islands. My duty was, I did the radiological survey. By doing that, it took me to literally ground zero. They weren't even marked ground zero. That's just where I was to get on literally my hands and knees with a garden shovel, not even a pair of gloves, and collect soil sample that would be later determined to see how radioactive it was. Then it would even go into a nuclear blast crater, the higher level of the radiation levels of the soil, or we would just simply dump it into lagoon. And we ended up putting 110,000 cubic yards of soil and debris in that nuclear blast crater and covered it with concrete. It's known as the Runit Dome. And today that concrete dome is over 45 years old and sits right at the sea. And of course, when we were there, it was in a nuclear blast crater that we had to reclaim it into the island. And so we never put a lining. It was impossible. We couldn't drain it or whatever. And so that left us there. And with that, as time progressed, especially as I got later in years, I was in the internet. Oh, wow. So one day I looked to see, hey, what did history have to say about the atomic cleanup? What does history have to say about the Runit Dome? And quite honestly, it wasn't really didn't sound like the place I was at. Didn't sound like what we did, because the atomic cleanup failed. The island I lived on, Lojo Island, the islands I cleaned up, I took samples on, are today. They're quarantined, and they will continue to be quarantined. For instance, plutoniums have a half-life of 25,000 years. Take 5 half-lives, 125,000 years. It's a coral atoll island. It's probably not even the geological life of that island itself. Now, I've also been able to be reunited with so many of the Marshallese, which has been such an incredible thing, as that's why we were there. We're told it's a humanitarian mission. Unfortunately, it's a failed mission, failed to be able to do an atomic cleanup. And as far as atomic cleanups now, fast forward, 45, 50 years, nothing's changed. All that can be done is what we did. We picked it up, moved it around. Picked it up, moved it around. There is no magical soap. There was no such thing as a cleanup. Today, there is no such thing as a cleanup. So with time, I got reacquainted with many of the veterans, for example, the military personnel that I worked with, which was predominantly with the northern islands, the contaminated islands where they did the testing. It was predominantly military personnel that I worked with. So I became a state commander of the National Association of Atomic Veterans, and with that I was able to speak to and meet in person many of the atomic veterans from the testing era and speak with them. And then as some messages that I really feel important to share, and that is radiation, death. Death is not the only side effect of radiation exposure. And there are so many illnesses. I just recently, I believe the last of the veterans, who ever worked in Crossroads, passed away at 100 years old. And you go, wow, long life. Didn't that go great? Well, no. His children. We're talking about chromosomal damages. Chromosomal damages that, well, children lost their lives with odd, strange illnesses, rare illnesses you never hear about. And, was the government going to say, oh yeah, it's associated with radiation exposure? No. I can't even go to my health professionals and say, hey, is this caused by radiation exposure? They don't know. Who are they going to ever see that's been exposed to the kind of radiation and toxic elements that I have been and those who with me have? And so to share that, and to share, of course, there is no such thing as an atomic cleanup, nuclear cleanup. There's no such thing. There is so many more illnesses, and it affects so many communities. The Marshallese community, my community, just probably faces in here of around the globe. We have some people here and so forth. And so that is very important to share. And it's really interesting. I'm going to have surgery a month from now, and it's for deviated septum and compacted sinuses. Well, I thought, okay, what does that have to do with radiation? Well, it's amazing. AI. Now I go to AI and I say, hey, is this related to radiation? Boom, print it out. Yes. Toxic radiation for nuclear workers, nuclear dose for exposure. It can deviate the septum. I've been living with that. And hey, I didn't know. My osteoporosis, my thin bones, I didn't know, until later doubt. My fried intestines, things of that sort. And so the effects of radiation, as I said, it's not just death, and it's also chromosomal. It's not just one generation. We're looking at multi-generation issue. So we all have to worry about our children, our grandchildren, and so forth. And for those of us, we sometimes feel, of course, parents feel pain. But for those like me, there's also guilt. So we're feeling guilt, we're feeling pain, we're feeling, something we just really can't accept. But what's important is what we're doing now, and just getting together and being able to speak about it and share experiences and share, what I've learned through the time. I think Marshallese in particular really enjoy oral history, and I guess I'm getting old. I'm oral history, so we'll go from there. And I really want to thank you, Komotara. And I know we have quite a few speakers, so I probably overtook my time already, but I'll let the next person come. And unless there's any questions. Okay, one question I get asked a lot is the dome leaking? The radioactive, all that material and so forth, is it leaking? Well, the huge dome, you see 110,000 cubic feet we put in that. We put over 600,000 cubic yards just dumped in the lagoon. Just dumped it. Didn't contain it, didn't do anything, didn't do that. The radiation elements and so forth are all around and so forth. So sadly, yes, it's leaking. We never lined it, we never did that. But the entire area is radioactive, and I really feel sorry for the Marshallese who live there. They're not able to eat any of the fish they catch. They can't eat the products they grow. They're dependent upon food subsidies that the U.S. sends them. What do we send them? Spam. What do we send them? Rice. So indirectly, we cause diabetes, and we're also talking to the long-term effects that they're having. So that's all sorts of challenges with the nuclear legacy. And again, I'll try to get away from this podium and let somebody else get up. Thank you.
Kumodada Paul. Our next speaker is Paul Lobo Swington. Pastor Paul is a Marshallese nuclear survivor from Bikini Atoll, one of the 2 former nuclear test sites in the Marshall Islands. Please help me welcome Mr. Paul Swington.
I feel like I'm at home. Yahweh, Komodada, for being here. I want to give honor where honor is due. Kile, His Excellency, Ambassador Silk, and everyone that also came along with us. I want to thank MEI for this opportunity to speak and to meet other nuclear affected community members, as well as all of you who are working to stop the proliferation of nuclear weapons. Even though I'm a Bikinian, excuse me, I have never seen my home atoll. Today I live in Missouri with my 4 children, my beautiful wife. Our people are scattered all over the place. We are in Arkansas, we are in Washington, we are in Oklahoma, we are in Hawaii, and we are on a small island called Kile in the Marshall Islands. We are everywhere. Where's our home? My people cannot return back home because it is very unsafe, just as you heard our previous speaker speak about it. There's no life. There's nothing we can do. Every time I talk about this subject, it gets me. You get to go to a place where you call home. I call this place home, but it's really not my home. It'll always be unsafe for thousands of years. My kids can't even go there. Land is important to the Bikini people. Matter of fact, it's important to all Marshallese people. It shows who we are. That's where we get our identity. There are plenty stories about the bikini told by our elders. One talks about, I love this one. The bikini reef god and the healing properties of the water in Bikini Lagoon itself. How people would dive to the bottom of the lagoon and place its water in a vial and wear it around their neck, just as I'm wearing this necklace right now. It's just for protection and healing. I've heard about how the elders would swim freely in the lagoon, about how the old men would chant, or what we would call roro, just so that they don't get bitten by the sharks. Those stories are now fewer as our elders are passing on. What stories will I tell my grandchildren is a question that comes in my mind. What stories about my home am I able to share to my children's children? I see photos of Bikini and the removal of my people by the U.S. military. I hear stories about my elders when asked if they would give up their lands temporarily for the good of mankind and world peace. My elders responded with these very words: everything is in God's hands. Or what we say, menodum jejarajulupin anich. We abbreviate it and we say moriba, which has become a motto for the Bikini people. This phrase, everything is in God's hands, I hear it a lot as a pastor, my line of work, as I visit people in the hospitals, with loved ones in the intensive care units, hearing bad news from the doctors. You know what they tell me? Everything is now in God's hands. People say that when they lose hope. But people tend to use those words all the time because it was passed down. But having to imagine what my elders went through, they didn't just lose hope. We lost our home. We lost our identity. We lost our pride. We lost our home. So that's why we say everything is in God's hands. We will be silent no more. We will proudly raise our voice and say these words, Moriba. Our people also have an anthem. Ichepermol ayat. The translations of that is no longer can I stay. It's true. It's often sung at Nuclear Victims Remembrance Day or at Bikini Day when the Bikini people commemorate our removal. It is an emotional song that talks about loss. No longer can I stay. I'm a father of 4. I can't imagine what it was like for the men to gather their family, being rushed to get their stuff, to evacuate this place for the goodness of mankind. I can't imagine the promises that were made to the children saying, hey guys, it's okay. You're with daddy. We're gonna go to this place. We'll be back home. Well, guess what? That promise has still never been met. We're still not back home. Where is home? I don't have one. I'm not only a Bikinian, but I'm also Ronglapis, a neighboring island to the Bikini Atoll. I have a member at my church that his mom was only 4 years old when these things happened, and she shares her stories all around the world. She shares the story of her Uncle John on Jane, which was the mayor at the time. He was getting ready to go out to fish. He and another fisherman, they were about to have coffee when they saw a glare of big, beautiful lights. And with that light was a following rushing wind that moved so many people, swayed the trees, startled the village. And following that wind was a loud bang. Boom. That woke up the whole village. Children crying, people running around, panicking, not knowing what to do. Mushroom cloud. After that loud noise, everyone went back to doing what they were doing when there was a fallout. Children playing in the fallout thinking it was a snow. They've never seen snow before. They wanted to see snow. The fallout took hours. Trees turned white. The ground turned white. They were told not to eat anything from the land, but only to eat the processed food that were given. Food shortage was big. They had no choice. They had to go fish. They had to climb the coconut trees. Getting blisters in their mouths, babies being born deformed, looking like animals. But I want to thank God that everything is still in His hands. Thank you for coming, and thank you for caring about the Marshallese people. Komodada.
Komodada, Pastor Paul. Our next guest speaker is Ms. Setsuko Shimamoto. Setsuko Shimamoto, 74, is a resident of the city of Kochi. Her father, Tobe Oguro, was exposed to radioactive fallout from the Castle Bravo detonation when a fishing boat he was aboard in operation in 1954, and she will be delivering her remarks on screen.
こんにちは。昨年、マジロで開催された核被害者追悼デーに日本から参加しました下本節子です。ロンゲラップの人たちと会って話すことができて、改めて放射能の影響の怖さを実感することができました。そしてすべての国が核禁条約に参加すべきであると確信しました。1954年、アメリカによる水爆実験で被災した高知県の漁船員や遺族が日本政府に補償を求める裁判をしています。私は原告団長を務めています。第五福竜丸が被爆したとき、たくさんの船が太平洋で漁をしていました。12月末までに放射能に汚染した魚を廃棄させられた日本漁船は延べ1000隻にもなります。私の父が働いていたマグロ漁船第七大丸もその中にいました。父は何も話しませんでした。ほとんどの船員たちは何も知らされず、中には口止めされた人もいます。放射性硬化物は日本、フィリピン、メキシコなど北半球を中心に地球規模で広がり、アメリカ中西部には日本の5倍も降っています。3月から5月の水爆実験6回の威力は広島型原爆の3220倍にもなります。想像してみてください。これは広島型原爆を8年以上毎日爆発させていることになります。 1954年5月には、調査船春骨丸で日本の科学者が世界で初めて海の汚染を調査するため出港しました。放射性硬化物は海洋では簡単に混じり合わないことが判明しました。海の汚染は海流によって少しずつ広がっていくのです。また、放射性物質が食物連鎖で濃縮していくことも判明しました。ビキニ被災を契機に、日本中原水爆実験反対の声が沸き起こりました。アメリカは反核運動を鎮めるため、日本政府と交渉を行い、$200万の見舞い金を出すことで政治決着しました。12月末には、魚の検査は打ち切られ、第五福竜丸以外の船員たちは検査されることも謝罪も保証もなく、すべて終わったことにされてしまいました。漁船員たちは黙ってしまいました。ではなぜ私たちが60年以上も経って裁判をしているのかというと、1980年代、畑高校生ゼミナールが取り組んだ地域の人たちの聞き取り調査で、たくさんの船員が血液の病気やがんなどで若くして亡くなったことが分かったからです。2013年頃にはテレビ局の取材でアメリカ外務省で機密文書が見つかりました。また、広島の研究チームが船員の血液や歯から被爆線量を推定して被爆の科学的な裏付けができました。船員の被爆は放射性物質が体の中に入り、細胞の近くで放射線を出し続ける内部被爆です。何年かして病気になっても被爆を証明することは難しいです。今でも日本の政府は内部被爆を認めません。広島、長崎、ビキニ、東京電力福島第一原発事故と国民がこれだけ放射能にさらされているのに、日本政府は核の抑止などと寝ぼけたことを平気で言っています。まずは自国民の被爆を認めること、そしてこれ以上被爆者を増やさない努力をすること、それこそが日本政府がしなければいけない国の保障です。そのためにも日本政府の核兵器禁止条約の署名・批准を求めます。そして核の加害国であるアメリカにも核実験の被害の全容を明らかにし、核禁条約を批准するよう求めてください。以上です。
We will now have a musical performance done by Matthew John, and the title of his song is called Back to You.
Yago, everybody. Please bear with me as I have to look at my lyrics. Just recently finished this song, but I feel a strong resonance this song has with the event. It's about potentially not having a home and being far away from your home. So hope you guys enjoy this. I'm hanging on to paradise, to sunny days and the rainy nights. on the reef, you see the burning sky. When the stars collide with the moonlight, I'll never give up the thought of you inside my head. I'm hanging on to you just by a thread, 'cause without you, I feel so lost here without you. And it's true, you have my heart and soul 6 feet deep in the land. I will never let you go. I will stay in the island waves, and I'll come back to you, and I'll come back to you. All along you were left here on your own. Your people hear your cries, but they're far from home. I know you're working miracles to process all the pain inside the toxic grounds that's gone to waste. So I'll never give up the thought of you inside my head. I'm hanging on to you just by a thread, 'cause without you, I feel so lost here without you. And it's true, you have my heart and soul 6 feet deep within the land. I will never let you go. I will stay in the island waves, and I'll come back to you. I'll come back to you.
Thank you, Matthew. Our next special guest speaker is Mr. Adedeji Ebo. He is the Director and Deputy to the High Representative to the Office of Disarmament Affairs. Mr. Ebo will present his remarks on screen.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I confirm that you can hear me? Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, I am honored and I must confess, very touched listening to the previous speakers to speak to you today on behalf of the United Nations High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, Ms. Izumi Nakamitsu, on the occasion of the Nuclear Victims Remembrance Day. We meet today amidst an increasingly troubled security environment. The continued fragmentation of the international community is particularly worrisome when it comes to nuclear weapons. But to be candid, this is not a new threat. For the last 79 years, we have lived in an era defined by the real prospect of nuclear annihilation, one that began with the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and one that continued through the decades of nuclear weapons tests that were the byproduct of the Cold War's arm racing. More recently, the threat has become more acute, with nuclear rhetoric again echoing and even exceeding the worst of the Cold War years. It seems that we are sliding backwards, and it is easy to feel helpless. But giving up or lapsing into inertia is no way to honor the legacy of the victims. We owe them a lot more than that. As the Secretary General said during last year's remembrance service in Hiroshima, and I quote, "It is our moral responsibility to speak as one. Nuclear weapons are intolerable," unquote. They have always been and remain a moral tragedy. Nuclear weapons do not bring security, only a looming danger and a threat to humanity. As we honor the victims of the use and testing of nuclear weapons, we should reflect on the catastrophic humanitarian consequences they have already caused. In doing so, we must acknowledge the enduring suffering of those affected and the terrible damage on our planet's environment. This is especially true given that, as the SG also noted, that the victims are some of the world's most vulnerable communities and most pristine environments. Last year, the General Assembly's resolution on addressing the legacy of nuclear weapons was a crucial step towards providing victim assistance and environmental remediation. It was a reminder of the continuing need for services such as the one we are having today to take place. With the High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, I join with you in honoring the victims and in calling upon all nuclear weapon states to honor their commitments and meet their disarmament obligations. I extend my heartfelt good wishes to you, and I thank you for your dedication to this very important cause. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Herbal. Our next special guest is our keynote speaker, His Excellency Ambassador John Silk, Permanent Representative to the Republic of the Marshall Islands to the United Nations. Please help me welcome His Excellency Ambassador John Silk.
Yahweh to all of you. Yahweh, our greeting in the Marshall Islands, the word we use all the time, every time when we meet people. Yahweh. Let me first take this opportunity to acknowledge the presence of some of our distinguished guests. I know in front of us here is His Excellency, the Ambassador of Kiribati to the United Nations, Ambassador Tito. And I may miss some of the other excellencies who are here, but to all of you, and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for honoring us with your presence this afternoon. I bring greetings of Yahweh from the people and government of the Republic of the Marshall Islands, on this important day in the history of our country and lives of our people. March 1st today, and each and every year, has been set aside by our government as a day to commemorate, pause, reflect upon, and contemplate the causes and effects of 67 nuclear devices that were detonated within our waters, over our islands and atolls, and our airspace. While this date is important, it must be remembered that the first nuclear refugees and nomads with nomad were forcibly removed and relocated to other parts of the Marshall Islands. These were the people of Bikini in 1946 and the people of Eniwetok in 1947 to make way for the United States to conduct the testing on these two atolls. It is important to consider the decisions to undertake nuclear weapons testing in the context of those times and institutions. It is easy to get frustrated at the United Nations. But if you look deeper, you may realize that the same institutions which had failed the Marshallese people also gave us the ability to protest and advocate. The first civilian UN High Commissioner of the Trust Territories of the Pacific Island was a person named Albert Thomas, a former US Senator from the state of Idaho and a Democrat, who had served in the United States Senate until 1950. He was an internationalist and interventionist, and drew closely upon his service in the 1930s as a missionary in Japan. He was horrified of the effect of the atomic weapon in Hiroshima and made radio broadcasts in Japanese, warning people to avoid Nagasaki and urged their surrender, the Japanese surrender. These memories of atomic impacts in Japan carried over into his service as the first UN High Commissioner. When High Commissioner Thomas unexpectedly passed away in 1953, then a young student, Dwight Heine, commemorated and said he brought a better understanding between our people and the United Nations. He is a living example of what the United Nations stand for, close quote. No doubt, the High Commissioner's actions had a lasting impression on Dwight Heine, who became the first Marshallese District Administrator for the Trust Territory. Perhaps Thomas's advocacy influenced this young man then in 1954, because he was one of those first Marshallese to champion and petition the United Nations Trusteeship Council to halt the nuclear testing. The message today is that the United Nations Trusteeship system ultimately failed in its responsibility to safeguard the well-being of our people, but it also offered a pipeline of advocacy, concern, and relief. Both visiting UN trusteeship delegations from New York and UN trusteeship administrators and staff would frequently raise concerns about testing impacts upon our people. It didn't stop testing, but the UN platform was vital in ensuring that we were not ignored or disregarded. last year, President Heine called for the United Nations for an apology for nuclear testing impacts. As you know, we petitioned the United Nations to halt these testing. The trusteeship resolutions in 1954 and 1956 are the only times any UN organ authorized the specific detonation of nuclear weapons with devastating consequences. Our Majlis petitions to all the testing were disregarded, but our safety and compensation was assured. Larger politics and not local communities blinded decision makers. The most important aspect of this day are the direct voices and agency of our closely affected communities. We are not passive victims, and our perceptions and fears are just as important as the science which sits behind it. Before I closed, I would like to make reference to the statements given by Pastor Paul. I know Pastor Paul's father. We were young men on the island of Ibai. I was born in 1956, and I was alive then when the testing stopped in 1958. Paul gave us some very, very important message. The message is, and always will be, remember the past. Protect the future. Not for Paul and myself, but generations of Majlis. Furthermore, let me add to what Paul said. I have grandchildren from Bikini and also from Eniwetak. So I have a daughter who was married to a Bikinian and born children who are from Bikini. And I have a son who was married to an Eniwetakis and have children from Eniwetak. Both of these children, all these children have never been to Eniwetak or the Bikini. I was privileged that I have been in my lifetime as an employee of the government and at one time a translator for some lawyers that came out to the Marshall Islands to work with the people of Bikini, people of Eniwetak, people of Rongelap, and people of Utrecht. And I've been privileged to go and visit all of these islands. And one of my visits was to the island of Bikini a few years ago. At that time, I had a granddaughter who was 2 years old from Bikini. And she, when I came back, she asked me, "Grandpa, what does Bikini look like?" I said, "Bikini is a beautiful island, just like the rest of the Marshall Islands. Sandy beaches, fish swimming all over the place, coconut crabs climbing up the trees, brushes all over the place. Beautiful." And she said, "Well, why can't we go back?" I couldn't give her a correct answer then because she was 2 years old. So I couldn't really explain why. Now she's in college. She'll be graduating next year from the University of Hawaii. And she's majoring in psychology. She has finally found the answer herself. Not that I had to explain to her, but she found the answer herself. And that's the important message we also must take, that regardless of what happened in the past, we must pursue and embed in our education, in our children, education. That education is the key that would answer all of our questions about why this took place. What can we do to improve and make it better for all of us and the generations to come? So I again want to take this opportunity to thank all of you for showing up, for coming to this occasion. And I particularly want to thank the organizers, the MEI, this group of young men and women who have dedicated their life to preaching the message to all of us. So on behalf of the government and people of the Marshall Islands, thank you for sharing with us and for your willingness to come here to New York. And as rightly been said, this is the first time that this kind of activity has been brought to the United States, to the United Nations, right across from the United Nations. So hopefully, in the coming years, we at the embassy will work with you or whoever comes that we could promote this even better than this year. But again, congratulations to the young men and women. And congratulations, thank you all for coming. God bless you. And may I also thank you, the organizers, and also this beautiful church, the church community, for allowing us to use their facilities this time of for this afternoon. God bless you all, and God bless the Marshall Islands.
Como tada, Ambassador. On your seats, there are a few items: a handkerchief and a flameless candle. The handkerchief is yours to keep in honor and commemoration of those that we have lost. And the flameless candle is for our vigil. I'm going to ask all of you if you can now turn on your candles. Today, we commemorate Nuclear Victims Remembrance Day. March 1st marks the 71st anniversary of Castle Bravo. On this day, we remember and honor those that were displaced from their homes and deeply affected by the nuclear weapons detonated in the Marshall Islands. There truly are no words to describe the hurt, pain, and sorrow for the innocent victims of these weapons of mass destruction. Let us honor and celebrate the strength of the nuclear victims and their families, not just today, but every day. Let us have a moment of silence.
Want you close, always. We'll be by the river of time. Want you to know, hollow is my soul. Without you, I'll never grow. Oh, oh, far away in a distant place, two lovers fighting each other's traces. I don't mind this long, long way. Can't say it's for nothing if we're right here together, and I can hear your voice through the night, guiding me from darkness heart is serenity, your hand in my hand. Darkness fades and it'll take some time. Your light is all that I see now. Won't you stay with me a little longer? We'll travel the rivers that I've cried, to a place we can be till the end of time. You'll be in my memories here for now and for now. Na 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 na. For now and for now. Na 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 na. For now and forever.
Thank you, Matthew. We would like to now invite Pastor Paul Swington to close this ceremony with a prayer.
Let us pray. Bow our heads. Father, we come to you right now and we thank you for your goodness. Lord, as our ancestors have said that everything is in your hands, Father, we say it even today. And we thank you for gathering us from all over this nation, oh God, to come to commemorate this day. I ask, oh God, that you just continue to be upon all the victims and the families, oh God. Lord, I pray that you will have your way. Let your blessings come and shine through. Lord, I pray that you will bless us as we go and as we come. In the highways and byways, oh God. Lord, we pray and we thank you that your word says that joy comes in the morning. And we ask now that your presence will be upon us and your blessings will follow us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, everyone. Well, this concludes the first portion of today's events. We will be taking a 5-minute break, and we will commence the second part of the event, which is the panel Seeking Nuclear Justice. We ask that everyone be back in your seats in 5 minutes. There is an art and history exhibit in the back, as well as Marshallese handicrafts, courtesy of the RMI Embassy. And I'm not really sure where the bathrooms are, but we can ask the staff. Oh, this way? It's out this way if you do need to use the bathroom. Oh, that way, sorry. But yeah, so if you could all just be back in 5 minutes, thank you very much.
If you would please find your seats, we'll have a reception after the panel concludes. And if the panelists would like to come to the front. Hey, Alicia. Wherever you want, I think we'll figure it out.
So are we going to introduce people and then give them judges? Or do you want to give it to them now while they're getting ready? It's up to you.
Right. Because I'm just introducing their name.
So they may not stand up.
Well, you can ask them to stand, and then, because the thing will come up on the bill, and you can give it to them when they stand up.
That sounds good.
I've been having trouble sleeping since for a while.
Yeah, we put it over there just.
So sorry.
Where's Danity and,
She's back there.
looks like we're waiting on Danity and.
But it's like just.
Raphael.
You know, hey,
In person? In person.
Online. They're online. They're here.
So I just need 1, 2. Oh, 1.
They're here up front. We need Danity and Debbie.
could Danity and Debbie please come to the front?
As much as want to give him any airtime, he is at least in terms of his rhetoric saying he wants to denuclearize.
So if Danity and Debbie could come to the front, please? Okay, we're ready to start the second half with a panel called Seeking Nuclear Justice. My name is April Brown. I'm one of the co-founders of MEI, and I'll be the panel facilitator today. Bless you. So because Ambassador Silk just spoke, he will be around for question and answer when the panel is finished. Do we have our Zoom guests on? Okay, so we will just, well, actually, first we want to recognize all of the panelists, Marcina and Corey. So if you all would stand up. So this is obviously a traditional thing. If you've been to any Marshallese event, the guests of honor always receive a wood or a necklace. Okay, you can be seated. Thank you. Okay, so we will start this afternoon with Mr. Rafael Pangalangan and Mr. Diego Baradares. Both are officers with the Human Rights Council, the UN Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights. And they will be joining us over Zoom.
Okay, so thank you so much for this opportunity to speak. I understand that we can begin with our brief presentation on this incredibly important topic on this incredibly important day to commemorate the victims of nuclear testing. Now, before we begin, do allow me to thank the organizers and extend our Iakwe and Komoltata from Majuro, Marshall Islands, where Diego and I are currently calling in from in the implementation of our mandate with OHCHR. I'm happy to see many familiar faces here on the panel, and a very familiar face, Danity, who I was with, who we were with just a few days ago here on island. So I'm very happy to see that you've made it safely to New York. So with that said, allow me to outline how this presentation would proceed. So both Diego and I will be speaking on the implementation of this mandate. I'll begin with the aspect of the mandate in which I'm principally supporting, which is the preparation of the report and the consultations related thereto. And then Diego will be able to elaborate further on the mandate and the good work that he is doing. So with that said, my name is Rafael. I'm a human rights officer with OHCHR. And we've been supporting this mandate, the nuclear legacy mandate of the Marshall Islands, which was created in 2022 through Human Rights Council Resolution 5135. And the panel topic aligns incredibly well with the work that we've been doing, which is how to achieve justice for the nuclear weapons testing that was conducted in the Marshall Islands from 1946 through 1958. And perhaps something that we emphasize early on in this work is that while we may be referring to nuclear tests that were conducted 70 or more years ago, this is not to say that this is simply an issue of the past. In fact, in the report that OHCHR published recently, last October, and that I understand that the organizers had shared with the participants, we find there that the nuclear legacy of the Marshall Islands is not just a chapter in history, but a continuing reality for the Marshallese people, and is a continuing reality as well, and a continuing interest for the world writ large. And the reason for that is something that we emphasize, that nuclear weapons, and nuclear by definition, is a global issue, it's a global matter. And that's something that we tackle through this mandate from a human rights framework. Now, perhaps as you may gather from the introduction made earlier, we are human rights officers. We work with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. And the backbone of our work builds upon the human rights framework. Through Resolution 5135, we were asked to do several things that relates to addressing the challenges and barriers to human rights posed by the nuclear legacy of the Marshall Islands. And part of that is the production of a report that should build upon consultations with states, with non-state actors, and with stakeholders, especially here and beyond RMI. It as well requests the office to engage in technical cooperation and capacity building with the National Nuclear Commission, who we thank for their support and coordination throughout the implementation of this mandate. So allow me to focus on the report for the time being, and given the limited time that we have. So last October, we published the first report on the human rights impacts of the nuclear legacy, and we identified several things. First, that the nuclear testing is not only an issue that involves human rights impacts in the past, that it involves human rights impacts that continue to today, and well, that have intergenerational impacts that we should continue considering for tomorrow. And when it comes to human rights, we identify, we use the spectrum of human rights, the entire spectrum of human rights, by identifying impacts on the right to life, on the right to health of the Marshallese people, the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, equality, and the right to non-discrimination, the right to housing, and as well as the human rights of specific groups in vulnerable situations, specifically on the impacts on children, women, and the gendered impacts, as well as the impacts on Indigenous people's rights. So these are all discussed more thoroughly in the report that I had earlier mentioned. And the report zeroes in on a specific human right, which is the right to a remedy. How do we address these human rights impacts? How do we address human rights violations? And that's where the right for nuclear victims is the use of a transitional justice framework. Now, when we speak of remedies, when we speak of justice, these are broad terms. And it is often the occasion that when we speak of justice, it begs another question. Well, what does justice look like? And something that we emphasize in every discussion that we have in HQ, in Switzerland, in New York, or here in the Marshall Islands, or globally, is that it is not for us, it is not for this report to impose a conception of justice on the Marshallese people. Rather, it is to communicate the conceptions of justice, the calls for justice through a human rights framework. So it's the other way around. It is not us telling, it is us listening and echoing and providing a platform where we can advance these calls for justice. And through the transitional justice framework, we recognize that indeed justice can come in many forms, such as forms beyond what can be described as a traditional, perhaps Western hegemony of justice. It doesn't always come at the bang of a gavel. It doesn't necessarily come through court proceedings. We find justice in other ways as well, such as through truth finding and truth seeking, through reparations, may that be in the form of compensation, rehabilitation, satisfaction, and apologies and acknowledgement, as well as guarantees of non-repetition. And in this first report, we focus on the element of truth. We highlight how truth is an element of justice that must be upheld. And we're happy to say that having published this first report, we are now preparing a second report, which is moving to the second element of justice, which is justice as a form of accountability. I've asked the organizers, and again, I thank MEI and all of the organizers for putting together this panel and event. But I've asked them to share with you as well a questionnaire that we have prepared, a call for input that would help inform this second report. And something that we provide in that questionnaire is a caveat, is an explanation that says, that when we speak of justice, this doesn't necessarily come in any particular form. Justice could be understood as liability, responsibility, reconciliation. It can be identified and understood as something achieved through indigenous processes and traditions, local practices, civil society efforts, such as the one that we are engaged in with today. So I'm happy to share that this work continues and that we will be producing a second report on how human rights of the Marshallese people continue to be impacted by the nuclear legacy. And that this report will be presented at Human Rights Council 63 next year, October. With that said, the call for input that we had published, we would invite your feedback, we would invite your participation, and it's truly hearing from all of you and all of the stakeholders with whom we engage that we will be able to produce work that is not only legally accurate but factually relevant on the ground, and that's something that is very, very important to Diego and I and the institution writ large. So I could go on, but I am conscious of time, so I'm happy to answer any questions later on. But let me pass the floor to Diego for the time being. And again, thank you so much, Komagata.
Dziękuję, Oleb. Dziękuję, Oleb. Thank you, everyone, Kumul Tata, for organizing this event, and for all the speakers. I'd like to recognize all those who have spoke before me, in the name of our keynote speaker, Ambassador John Silk. And I was very touched by his comments and his and how he outlined a bit of the history of the nuclear legacy of the Marshall Islands and how it closely relates to the United Nations. He referenced the work of the first UN Commissioner for the Trusteeship Territory. And in 1954, at least since 1954, the Marshallese have presented petitions to the United Nations concerning the nuclear legacy. And the resolutions that Rafael mentioned now is a long overdue, perhaps response to all this history of engagement and activism by Marshallese before the United Nations that now allow us to do the work we're doing. So Rafael mentioned the work relating to the report that was mandated by Resolution 5135 of the Human Rights Council. And report, which will also be done according now to the new resolution. My name is Diego Valadares. I'm here in Metro, attending activities relating to the nuclear legacy. I hear that my connection is not very good. Let me try to change places. 1 second. Is the connection better now? Could someone confirm whether you can see me well?
Yeah, we can hear you. We can see you, Diego.
Okay, so I'll try from the balcony. I'm in the hotel room, and the connection is not working perfectly. But what I was saying is that considering the long history of engagement of the Marshallese with the United Nations in its quest for justice for this nuclear legacy, since at least 1954, but even before that, engaging with the United Nations. The two resolutions have requested also technical assistance and capacity building for identifying what are the gaps and what are the needs in this path for nuclear justice. And because of that, I'm based currently in the Federated States of Micronesia, in Pohnpei, in the multi-country office of the United Nations, and working very closely with the government of the Marshall Islands, but in particular with the National Nuclear Commission in advancing the strategy, the national strategy for coordinated action for nuclear justice, which has a series of key pillars. I've been here since February last year. We've had 6 visits to the country. This is the 6th visit to the country. We've done activities, consultations, workshops in Medro, in Ibai, and neighboring islands, in Lib, and recently we've been able to visit Jaluit, and we hope to, in the near future, do activities also with communities in other parts of the Marshall Islands in regard to the nuclear legacy. Our strategy this week, we'll be working with the National Nuclear Commission in developing our strategy for this year and deciding some of the workshops and activities we'll be carrying out. The reason why I am in the Federated States of Micronesia is that that's where the United Nations is mostly hosted. And there, we've been able to coordinate with other United Nations entities to contribute and to engage their work and to mainstream the nuclear legacy in the work in the Marshall Islands. In this workshop we'll be having next week, the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, will be joining us. Other entities have been addressing and looking at their work, the many projects in the Marshall Islands from the lens of the nuclear legacy, including the United Nations Population Fund, looking at aspects relating to gender, to sexual and reproductive health. The UNDP will be looking at different possibilities regarding cooperation on health, on contributing to the establishment of a peace museum on a national nuclear that will be highlighting the nuclear history of the Marshall Islands and beyond, of the Pacific as a whole. On building the capacity of national actors, engagement of the UN, on the engagement with the UN, human rights mechanisms that can be accessed by the people of the Marshall Islands, by the Marshallese living abroad, by other civil society organizations committed to nuclear justice. And this year, the Universal Periodic Review of the United Nations, which is a peer review process where every country can comment on the human rights records of every other country during a 3.5 hours meeting in Geneva, based on reports received by civil society, by the government itself, and by UN entities. The deadline for reports of civil society for the report of the Marshall Islands is the 7th of April. So that's one opportunity for engaging, and we've been in the past 2 weeks engaging closely with many actors here in Medro on the possibility of the nuclear legacy being highlighted in this report, and civil society presenting inputs to that matter. Other special procedures have engaged very closely with the Marshall Islands, including special rapporteurs, as we call them, experts that have been elected by the Human Rights Council to work in specific topics. There was a visit of one of these special rapporteurs in 2012 to see, to understand the relationship between the nuclear legacy and the toxicity and how it impacts the enjoyment of human rights. And there was a visit last year that we helped facilitate on the special rapporteur on the rights of internally displaced persons. These experts have also made a series of statements. Last year, during Nuclear Victims Remembrance Day, 14 of these experts made a public statement calling for justice for the victims of nuclear tests. And that statement was also in commemoration of the International Day of Disarmament and Non-Proliferation, which is observed on the 5th of March. And they highlighted the quest for justice for Castle Bravo and for all the other 66 known nuclear tests that took place in the Marshall Islands. Finally, another group of mechanisms of the United Nations for accessing justice and for establishing the human rights of the people of the Marshall Islands in this context are what we call the treaty body mechanisms, which are mechanisms that review the status of implementation of certain human rights treaties in the country. And we are also assisting the government, civil society, on how to engage with that said, and I look forward to the continuation of this debate. And I thank the organizers for putting together. And one final comment is the importance of the leadership
Thank you,
of the march.
Rafael and
This
Diego.
topic.
We appreciate your work,
Thank you.
and I know our organization is eager to continue to work with you moving forward. So our next two panelists, we have them lumped together, so I'll go ahead and introduce both of them. Ms. Danity Lauken and Ms. Debbie Schatz. Both are nuclear justice activists. Both are from the Marshall Islands. So we'll start with Danity. And for those of you on YouTube that are watching the live stream, don't have, I don't think, the ability to see, but just for the sake of time, we put their bios on the screen for you so we can get to what they need to say. It's Danity.
Komotada. I would like to start by joining my fellow Marshallese in expressing my warm Yahweh and good afternoon to everyone. I'm Danity once again, and I'm very grateful for this opportunity to join our esteemed panelists to explore the aspects of nuclear justice. And I'd like to acknowledge the organizers of this event, MEI. My hat's off to you. Thank you so much for organizing this very important event. And as we've heard, this is the first time ever held here in the state of New York. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed, distinguished guests, my passion for this topic of nuclear justice stems from my personal experience of being a Marshallese person myself. And I've lived in the Marshall Islands all my life, but had little awareness and understanding of how the US nuclear testings affected and continues to affect our Marshallese people, land, seas, food resources, and not to mention culture and way of life, and overall our health and well-being. And so we know now that the US did detonate 67 nuclear and thermonuclear weapons in our islands from 1946 to 1958. In particular, the horrendous harm that was caused on people and land when, in 1954, the Castle Bravo was detonated. So, as someone who's an educator by profession back home, I'm inclined to join my country and people to educate the current and next generation of Marshallese to be aware of this nuclear history, simply because they have the right to know, and so they can understand the context of this issue and seek radiation solution to address real need for our people, and further, to live their lives with dignity and be able to ensure accountability is truly reflected without uncertainty. So on the topic of education, educating the next generation, I pay my tribute to the words of His Excellency Ambassador of the importance of educating. So please allow me to share with you a recent conversation that I had with my 10-year-old daughter. Earlier this week, before I left the Marshall Islands to be with you all here in New York, we hosted our National Education Week and Nuclear Victims Remembrance Day pre-events back home. The RMI Public School System and the National Nuclear Commission collaborated on a film screening event to bring together young Marshallese people to learn about this nuclear history. The title of the film that we screened was Nuclear Savage, and it's filmed by Adam Horowitz. And in short, this documentary film documented the US nuclear testing in the Marshall Islands, and it shows the unethical events of the Project 4.1, where the US government returned Rongola people to their atoll shortly after the Castle Bravo was detonated, and the fallout had polluted the entire atoll and people. And this was intended to study radiation impacts on humans. and the Rongla people lived and ate radioactive food for nearly 30 years, of which many mothers in particular developed cancers and had babies that were still born or were born with, had birth defects. So watching the film with my daughter that evening, I was once again struck by the cruelty of the US action and the enduring suffering of Bikini and Rongla residents. The testimonies of the residents of the Rongla women in this film will forever engraved in my memory. Each of them expressed loss, frustration, and suffering, and an unwavering sense of resilience. They called out the US that the nuclear testing was not an accident, and they demanded real justice, and wanted the US to acknowledge their wrongdoings. To this day, many of these women have passed on and never experienced true and meaningful justice. So after the event ended and on the drive home, my 10-year-old daughter offered a powerful insight when I asked her what she thought about the film. She said, and I quote, "People at blind believe." And I asked what she meant, and she explained with an analogy, saying, "Okay, Mom, it's like a guy asks a kid if he could spare $5. Then the kid says, 'Sure, okay.' The guy promised he'll give $6 in return. But then the next day came and the kid never got his money back." In other words, it was like a child trusting a stranger who promises a reward but never delivers. Just as the child is betrayed, the Marshallese people trusted the US's promise that the tests were for the good of mankind, believing it was in God's hand. They didn't realize they'd lose their homes forever. My daughter concluded that this misplaced trust has left our people with lasting hardship and sadness, and this is still true for many Marshallese. I was shocked, to say the least, of her reflection. And I thought to myself, I've attended the Nuclear Remembrance Day since I was a little girl myself, and yet I was unsure of these stories, let alone recall expressing my thoughts the way she did, especially at 10 years old. So such an event like the screening of the film is not only vital for educational purposes, it demonstrates the crucial role of intergenerational dialogue in preserving historical memory and fostering understanding. And this is one of the many reasons why the Nuclear Victims Remembrance Day event is important and significant. Now, furthermore, on health, I'm particularly concerned about the gender-specific impacts of radiation. Women, for example, as we know, experience devastating reproductive health problems following the Castle Bravo test. This is well known in scientific studies, and Pacific women have heard the stories from other women in the nuclear test country of many years of Pacific Women's Meeting, where they have reported on the impacts of nuclear testing experienced by these women. And I'm also particularly learning and interested in listening more carefully to information on gender and radiation. Additionally, in the Marshall Islands, we've also seen a rise in cancer in women and in children, such as leukemia and other cancer-related illnesses. I know these cancers exist in our health data collection, and our health department also identifies them as existing problems, which we need more studies on a systematic way. But just to let you know today, an anecdote, one technician told me that there are more cancers happening. And this I'm interested in exploring more in studies. Other community members and health people back home express the need to have an oncologist, as we don't have one today in the Marshall Islands. I know these health issues need investment. The health situation is quite complex, and the lack of adequate healthcare support in the Marshall Islands has forced many families, including mine, to seek treatment, a burden that not everyone can afford. So in our view, and perhaps in my daughter's view too, coming from a nuclear test country, and as people living with the ongoing impacts of nuclear tests that happened so many years ago, nuclear justice is complex. We believe it's important to continue educating and pressing for better healthcare systems that support our current health needs now. And from experience, we continue to need real answers and solutions to radiation impacts on us, on people, our islands, and our seas, and resources and sources of food. And I've even been working on the treaty and thinking lots on Article 6 and 7, and I equally think that the issues I've just spoken to you about today that affects the Marshall Islands and the such impacts that exist for a long duration, which we are remembering today on this anniversary of the Castle Bravo test, require assistance that will come to us, the affected communities, and we must experience the benefit if it is to be called for victims today. And with this meeting coming up this week, I can never not think of the experiences of the people now as the most important for assistance. And these impacts must be alleviated and eased. If we're going to talk about nuclear justice, it can and should take many forms. Komodada.
Yakoyalep. Excellencies, friends, supporters, thank you for having me and thank you all for being here. My name is Debbie Schutz. I'm an artist slash activist, or as I like to say, artivist. I was born and raised in the Marshall Islands. And as mentioned, today marks one of the saddest events in our history, but it also highlights our resilience as Marshallese. We set aside this day to commemorate our nuclear survivors and their resilience in the face of so much horror and injustice. And I'll speak to you today how the nuclear spaces and discussions impact the up-and-coming generations today. I'll do so with a short story. It started with an arts camp that my friends and I joined as high school freshmen run by Kathy Kitchener, one of our climate champions. It was a climate arts camp where we could express ourselves and our messages about the climate crisis. And it was through the same program that we learned about the interconnectedness of the nuclear legacy and the climate crisis for the Marshallese people. Fast forward a couple years later, me and the same group who attended this camp as kids end up being the ones running it the next few years. Each of them incredible climate champions in their own regard, and every year getting new kids involved and empowering them to find their voice and speak up for their islands. It becomes a cycle of continuing to educate and empower more people to be involved in this fight and to advocate for justice. This was a similar case when I joined MISA at USP, which at this stage had already done a lot of great work in bringing awareness of the Marshall Islands and the nuclear issues to Fiji and the South Pacific. And the student-led organization, which was born from strong-willed leaders, empowers incoming Marshallese leaders and the university's regional students from across the Pacific to continue this momentum and fight for nuclear justice, in line with the spirit of this year's theme, to work in unity and collaboration. There are so many opportunities now to educate and empower our youth to speak up for their islands and to help shape them into the leaders of tomorrow. For me personally, I use my painting and my poetry as my medium for advocacy because I was once told, and I will never forget this, that art is a way to connect our humanness beyond the technicalities and data and research. You get to view into another person's world, and sometimes it can light that fire that makes people feel personally connected to that fight against injustice, or sometimes even challenge their own perspectives. Nuclear justice to me means transparency. There are still several classified documents that haven't been released, and the few that have been are heavily redacted, and documents such as Project 4.1, the study of accidental exposure on human beings, gives ideas as to what caliber of information about this issue still isn't being told to us. And as we fight, let us also remind our survivors and champions of this injustice. The late John Anjain, one of our nuclear survivors and champions who served as a Rongalap senator, described his experience with a soldier who told him, quote, "Their lives were smaller than a fingernail," end quote. This increased his belief that they did use them as guinea pigs and not to provide the medical aid that they had claimed. Lidon Egnilang said she experienced 7 miscarriages and that if it wasn't for the US military, her children would have grown up like the other kids she saw around her. End quote. Betty Edmond expressed that as children, they thought the US was going through another war. Their food was contaminated with powdery substances, their water yellowed, and not knowing what was happening, consumed these poisonous toxins anyways. Let us remember them and their stories, and that we continue to fight for their justice and for their memory. Komoltada.
Thank you, Danity and Debbie. Those are very powerful words, and thank you also for your work. Very young and have already done a lot, and I'm anticipating doing much more in the future. Next up, we have Mr. Benedict Gabua Madison, who is the Executive Director of the Marshallese Educational Initiative.
Good afternoon, everyone. The history of U.S. nuclear testing in the Marshall Islands is largely unknown to most Americans. Even less is understood about the ongoing biological, ecological, and cultural consequences of this testing legacy, as well as the challenges faced by Marshallese migrants in the United States. Many people assume that Marshallese individuals who relocate to the U.S. under the Compact of Free Association, first signed in 1986 and renewed in 2024, receive the same benefits as many U.S. citizens. Common misconceptions include the belief that Marshallese migrants have access to free health care or receive payments for migrating, both of which are untrue. In reality, most Marshallese migrants encounter significant barriers in education, employment, and healthcare access, factors that contribute to their decision to relocate. Most challenges stem from language barriers, which often serve as the first hurdle and a complex web of additional difficulties. Many of you know our organization, MEI, for its efforts to raise awareness about the nuclear legacy and our participation in national and international movements advocating for nuclear justice. We strive to increase understanding of our history and the damages caused by nuclear testing, while also fostering connections with nuclear frontline communities and collaborating with disarmament advocates. Our goals include abolishing nuclear weapons and supporting the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. In addition to these efforts, we are actively involved in our community in Arkansas and across the country, working to address the consequences of the nuclear legacy. It's important to note that Marshallese people experience one of the highest rates of diabetes in the world. This issue can be linked to forced relocation and the introduction of highly processed foods by the US. Many in the diaspora continue to rely on a high-calorie, low-nutrition diet that is readily available and inexpensive. Thyroid issues, leukemia, and birth defects were among the first long-term illnesses identified as direct consequences of radiation exposure. Today, Marshallese children are diagnosed with developmental disabilities and autism at an alarming rate. Many of these conditions were previously unknown to the Marshallese people, to the extent that we do not even have words in our language to describe them. This is why one of our programs focuses on creating a glossary of terms to identify different types of disabilities. This effort aims to help families understand their children's diagnosis and to reduce the stigma surrounding these conditions. In the United States, newborns are tested for genetic disorders. However, follow-up care is often not pursued by Marshallese families due to a lack of health insurance. Even when they do have insurance, many families are unaware of the resources available to them. The cultural impact of the nuclear testing legacy is far-reaching. Marshallese youth who relocate to the US with family members, as well as the growing number of Marshallese born in the US, often struggle with proficiency in the Marshallese language. Although Marshallese is spoken at home among families, Children primarily learn English in school, which leads to many not feeling fluent in their native language. Heritage speakers, particularly in landlocked states like Arkansas, often lack vocabulary related to island life. Even when older generations who are proficient in Marshallese may have difficulties with terms used by their elders, largely due to their distance from their homeland. Everyday discussions seldom include references to coconut trees, canoes, or seafaring, which creates a gap in cultural understanding. As the language fades, so does the culture associated with it. As previously noted, one of the primary challenges faced by Marshallese individuals in the diaspora is the language barrier. Access to translations for essential documents such as public benefits applications, insurance forms, and prescription instructions is quite limited. When translations do exist, they are often inaccurate or confusing, frequently relying on non-standard spelling derived phonetically from American missionaries instead of the standardized Marshallese spelling. Though hospitals are required to provide interpreters, trained interpreters are rare, and certified Marshallese interpreters are nearly non-existent. Hospitals often resort to using a patient's child or other youth in the household. In the labor setting, Marshallese in the diaspora usually have low English language proficiency and do not possess the skills needed to meet the requirements of higher paid jobs. As a result, they work in factories, and in Arkansas in particular, they work in the poultry industry. Workers in the poultry and other factories were deemed essential workers and were forced to work or be fired. Poultry plants were also a source of contagion, which resulted in the Marshallese being disproportionately impacted. Arkansas is an employment at will state, which means an employer has the right to fire an employee without cause. In the current political climate, even though Marshallese are not immigrants and thus cannot be categorized as undocumented, immigration and custom enforcement officials, nonetheless, have recently begun to target Marshallese residents. I would like to note that in the past 4 or 5 weeks, my organization has been working closely along with the Marshall Islands Consulate in Springdale, Arkansas, to assist more than nearly 800 Marshallese families to update their passports, to retrieve or update their I-94 immigration form, and to address any legal matters that they have with the court. We did all of that and continue to do all of that while also planning for this big event that we're having today. The targeting of Marshallese individuals who are legally present but still subject to deportation has led to economic disenfranchisement as well as social and cultural rights violations. Excuse me. These are just a few challenges our community faces in the diaspora, and they are directly or indirectly linked to the nuclear legacy. After all, it is the reason why Marshallese are here in the United States. Still, I have hope. The Marshallese youth who have the chance to learn their history and language are mostly eager to do so. I also have hope because you all are here. Whether in person or virtually, and because you care. Like me, my team, and our community, you want to see nuclear justice. Let's continue to work together, lift frontline community members, and continue pushing for a world free of nuclear weapons. Komoltada.
Thank you, Benedict. Next up, we have Ms. Alicia Sanders-Zacre, the Policy and Research Coordinator with International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons.
Thank you so much, April. Thank you so much to the organizers of this excellent event. Thank you for inviting me to speak here. I'm really humbled to be alongside such excellent panelists, and likewise have been really moved by all of the presentations today, so thank you very much. Dear Excellencies, colleagues, and friends, it's really a privilege to be here today representing ICANN, a coalition of civil society organizations in more than 110 countries, including in the Marshall Islands, at this important Nuclear Victims Remembrance Day event. In my remarks, I'll speak about the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the TPNW, as an additional instrument of justice for the Marshall Islands to address the ongoing legacy of nuclear weapons harm. Many of us, including myself, are here in New York for the upcoming third meeting of states parties for the TPNW that will be taking place this upcoming week, and where issues of victim assistance and environmental remediation, as it's called in the treaty, will be addressed. The government of the Marshall Islands and civil society representatives from the Marshall Islands have played a really significant role in the TPNW since its inception, including helping to draft these treaty provisions on victim assistance, environmental remediation, and international cooperation during its negotiation. More recently, I'd also like to thank President Heine for her remarks in March of last year that the Marshall Islands supports the treaty because it's good for the world. This treaty is really grounded in international humanitarian law and international human rights law, and complements a transitional justice approach by taking forward 4 key pillars of transitional justice: truth-seeking, justice, reparation, and guarantees of non-recurrence. Just on that last point, the treaty prohibits all nuclear weapons activities and is the only globally applicable treaty in force that prohibits nuclear testing, and is the only applicable treaty that explicitly prohibits nuclear use. TPNW states parties are committed to including communities impacted by nuclear weapons use and testing in its implementation. For example, in the Vienna Action Plan, which the governments that have joined the treaty adopted at the first meeting of states parties, governments committed to closely consult with, actively involve, and disseminate information to affected communities at all stages of the victim assistance and environmental remediation process, which is one aspect that I think really distinguishes the TPNW from many other multilateral and bilateral processes on nuclear justice, unfortunately. The treaty's articles on victim assistance and environmental remediation, international cooperation, Articles 6 and 7, lay out a shared framework of responsibility amongst all states parties. While Article 6 guarantees that states directly affected by nuclear weapons use and testing retain the sovereign right to determine how assistance and remediation is implemented within their country, Article 7 makes it clear that all governments that have joined the treaty and who are in a position to do so must also contribute to assisting survivors of nuclear weapons use and testing and remediating contaminated environments. And crucially, this framework does not absolve nuclear-armed states of their responsibility, even if they have not yet joined the treaty, as the treaty explicitly states in Articles 6.3 and 7.6. And you don't just have to take my word for it. The International Committee of the Red Cross, which is widely regarded as one of the preeminent interpreters of international law, explains in its briefing note on these articles of the treaty that Article 6.3 of the TPNW should be understood as serving a dual legal function. First, that the implementation by an affected state party of its obligations under the treaty to provide victim assistance and to remediate the environment does not affect in any way the obligation of other states towards that affected state party under international law or bilateral agreements, even if such obligations overlap in their objectives with those of the positive obligations of the TPNW. And second, should any of these third states opt to become party to the treaty, their obligations stemming from international law or bilateral agreements would not be nullified. And the ICRC explicitly references the example of the obligation of the United States towards the Marshall Islands under the Compact of Free Association in clarifying that the TPNW does not nullify existing bilateral agreements, and notes that in addition to bilateral agreements, other international law, including the law on state responsibility, as well as environmental law, may apply. Thus, the treaty serves to enhance international cooperation, creating new international mechanisms for affected countries that join the treaty and communities in those countries to receive support from any other state that has joined the treaty and that is in a position to help. Today, 11 Pacific Island states, the Cook Islands, Fiji, Kiribati, New Zealand, Niue, Palau, the Solomon Islands, Samoa, Tuvalu, and Vanuatu have already joined the TPNW, with the Solomon Islands being the most recent to sign and ratify. As legal experts authoring the report that Nuclear Weapons Ban Monitor articulate, TPNW states parties are also allowed to participate in security alliances and military cooperation agreements with nuclear armed states and may continue to carry out all planning, operations, exercises, and other military activities with them as long as these activities do not involve nuclear weapons. We're very hopeful that the Marshall Islands will soon join the TPNW, where it can retake the very influential role that it has had in the treaty, and particularly in the implementation of Articles 6 and 7. As of today, 98 states have signed, ratified, or acceded to the TPNW, which is just one away from half of all of the world's countries. The Marshall Islands can be the country to bring TPNW membership to a global majority. At ICANN, we look forward to welcoming the Marshall Islands into this groundbreaking treaty for nuclear abolition and nuclear justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia. And finally, we have Mr. Chuck Johnson, who's the Policy Director with the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War.
Thank you. I want to thank the Marshallese Educational Initiative and the Permanent Mission of the Republic of the Marshall Islands for hosting this important commemorative event. I am Chuck Johnson, Director of the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War's Geneva Liaison Office, and I speak to you today both as a representative of IPPNW and its 56 national affiliates worldwide, and also as an American citizen who takes seriously our nation's responsibility for the legacy left in our name by our government. I'm honored to be given this opportunity to speak during Nuclear Victims Remembrance Day, 71 years after the notorious Castle Bravo nuclear test that decimated Bikini Atoll and harmed and ruined so many lives. During the 57th regular session of the Human Rights Council, as referred to earlier, held in Geneva in October last year, in the NGO section of the discussion around the High Commissioner's report on the nuclear legacy in the Marshall Islands, Chris Sorrow, our young IPPNW fellow, also an American, spoke on IPPNW's behalf and said, "Many Bikinians present at the first test still recall a promise by U.S. Commodore Ben Wyatt. He told them, quote, no matter if the Bikinians found themselves on a sandbar or adrift on a raft at sea, they would be taken care of as if they were the children of America," end quote. The U.S. has abandoned this promise, and in doing so, the Marshallese people. The whole of the Marshall Islands were contaminated by radiation from 67 nuclear tests, equivalent to more than 7,200 Hiroshima bombs. We urged the Human Rights Council to approve and implement, which they did, or approved in any case, the recommendations of the High Commissioner's report. We call on the U.S. to pay the compensation claims requested by the people of RMI and to release all pertinent data to the Marshallese government and the public. We also entreat all those within the international sphere to support the implementation of the Marshallese transitional justice work, end quote. Hearing Chris speak these words is one of the proud moments that I've had here working for IPPNW, and made me very happy for him that he got the opportunity as an American to speak those words in that international forum. Unfortunately, we continue to see the type of thinking that led to the cruel and deceptive behavior of the American government during its nuclear testing program in the Marshall Islands, Nevada, and elsewhere. If anything, this thinking seems to be becoming more prevalent once again. It is essential that everyone understand that selfish nationalism brings all of us down. A culture that celebrates cruelty and is indifferent to others will ultimately fail. It will consume itself along with everyone and everything else. The mask is now off, in a sense, and this way of thinking, which has always been lurking behind nice words and partial good deeds, is now out in the open for people to see directly, a little easier to see. In these times, we who wish to change this destructive course need a steel will, but also a generous heart. One of the things I most value in my current work is getting to know people with those characteristics in the Marshallese and Pacific Island communities. I'm learning by watching others do it. We have to remember that everyone has a heart. It might be buried deep, but our goal must be to find it and to touch it. At this moment, IPPNW has the honor of working closely with representatives of Pacific Island nations and Kazakhstan on an important resolution that is being planned for the upcoming 78th World Health Assembly, 19 to 27 of May, 2025, entitled, quote, "Effects of Nuclear Weapons on Health and Health Services," end quote. In early November last year, lead sponsors of the Marshall Islands, Samoa, and Vanuatu, with co-sponsors Fiji, Kazakhstan, and Micronesia, filed the draft resolution and concept note and began a series of 6 informal consultations with other World Health Assembly member states. This simple 2-page resolution is intended to renew the previous mandate for the World Health Organization to study the health and environmental effects of nuclear weapons and nuclear war, as it had done in landmark studies in 1987 and 1993. The ongoing WHO mandate for studying these health effects had been sunsetted along with many other mandates in 2020, so it is necessary to renew it again now. In conducting the informal hearings, the patience and clarity of the lead sponsor diplomats impressed me immensely. Without naming names and embarrassing anyone, I can tell you that I refer to one of them as the steel hand and another as the velvet glove. The informal meetings winnowed down the issues left to basically one. Should WHO be allowed to study only the health effects of nuclear war, as it is now mandated by the recently passed UN General Assembly resolution? Or can it include, as it did for WHO in the 1990s, the health effects of nuclear weapons, including, most significantly, nuclear weapons testing? The sponsors, now including Burkina Faso, Guatemala, Iraq, and Peru, are continuing to seek consensus in bilateral discussions, but are prepared, if that fails, to bring the resolution to the floor of the World Health Assembly for a vote. During the upcoming 3rd meeting of states parties, IPPNW will be calling on all TPNW states parties to endorse and consider co-sponsoring the proposed World Health Assembly resolution. Its formal title is Effects of Nuclear Weapons and Nuclear War on Health and Health Services. To renew WHO's 1987 report, Effects of Nuclear War on Health and Health Services, and the 1993 report, Health and Environmental Effects of Nuclear Weapons. We further support full funding of the update of these studies, estimated by WHO to cost a total of $540,000 over a 4-year period. Thank you again for your time and the honor of speaking at today's important event. I guess you'll be opening it to questions here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chuck. So we'll take a few minutes to take questions from the audience. If anyone has a question, you probably grab a mic and take to you.
Yeah, this is Bob Sanders, and I just wanted to know why Marshall Islands haven't joined the treaty yet. I'm not sure who can answer this, but maybe several panelists, but that's my question.
Anyone like to take that?
Yeah.
I'm not on the panel, but I guess I'll have to answer. Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you very much. As of right now, the Marshall Islands government is still studying this agreement. We actually were involved in the negotiation process. Actually, but it's just that we haven't signed it. Currently, our main concern is that the way we read Article 6 and Article 7 of the agreement seems to basically put the burden on the victims of the testing to basically take care of themselves. There's nothing in the treaty that basically enforces it. I'm sure you could say, well, we have the Compact of Free Association Agreement, so that the United States should be involved in it. But it's more than that, because it's not just the United States that conducted testing, but none of these nuclear countries that conducted the test are part of the treaty. None of them. So that's one of the reasons why we haven't been, at this stage, been able to agree to sign up or to ratify the treaty. That's the position of this government at the moment. It might change depending on how we look at it as we study it further. But at the moment, that's the position of this government at this stage of the treaty. I know that there has been talk. We have been looking at possibilities of how we could perhaps, if there's a mechanism, the way to amend the treaty that would basically lift the burden from the victims and give it to the countries that actually did the testing. Because right now, the way we read it, Article 6, Article 7, it may be a different way of reading from what the ICANN people are saying, and I know they have been pushing for us to join. But from our perspective, we need to study this further, because there's also the issue of whether, if we sign off on this treaty, it would impact the agreement we have with the United States on their obligations under the Compact. So those are the issues that we're studying very closely. It's not that we don't want to sign the treaty, because we were involved in negotiating the treaty in the first place, but we couldn't get to where we wanted to. So it may be that in the future, maybe tomorrow or the next day, we would sign up on the treaty. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Danieli of the International Center for Multi-Generational Legacies of Trauma. I'm totally with you, Ambassador, from a psychosocial point of view, and from the history of victims' rights in the United Nations. Victims always had to prove that they are victims. A lot of the justice systems put victims in the position of having to prove that they are victims, that they're victimized, and therefore that their right to justice, to redress, you heard all the elements, I don't want to repeat, that their rights would be fulfilled by whoever the quotes the perpetrators would be. And of course, the issue, I don't know, Alicia, if you mentioned the trust fund. I think you didn't, but the trust fund is also totally relevant to this issue and what the trust fund is going to be for. Is it going to provide, it says that it's going to provide funds for studying and for care. Again, would the studying, let's say the funds that would go to the studies to prove that the victims are victims, be at the expense of caring? So I'm 100% with you. There's a lot of discussion to still be really devoted to this issue. And it puts the whole justice system online, not just this particular resolution. So we're ready to fight anyhow.
Anyone want to comment from the panel?
Yeah, in terms of the issue of doing studies, obviously proving things is an important part of getting justice, as you say. So it is part of the system. It's inevitably part of the system. And there have been a lot of studies that have been done in recent years in increasing numbers. And in the case of what we're trying to do with the World Health Organization and the World Health Assembly is do a summary of the most recent studies and add it in and make it, give it the seal of approval of the International Health Organization, and therefore give a better basis by which those who have been harmed can get justice. So I think it's an important part. I mean, you're right that it's unfortunate that it has to be proved, but in terms of legal rights, it's necessary, and we think it's important. So and there's a lot of evidence. Unfortunately, I wish there wasn't, but there is. Does anybody else want to say anything?
Another question?
First of all, thanks so much for the panel discussion. I'm really honored to be here. And so what I'd like to ask about is that archives. And we come from South Korea, and when we are working on the nuclear impact and what you can do with that, the core is we realizing that the archives is very important, and the health check and how many people are impacted. And what I learned from MEI recently is that the access to the archive is not available yet. And my moral question and also the technical question is that why is that so immoral? The US even doesn't allow to the MEI and the Argentina people to that information. And the technical question is that who is doing that? I'm not asking MEI, but the people who are responsible of this. American people, and also maybe ICANN or other organizations.
Anyone like to speak to that? Well, I know personally, I know that the United States has a policy for a certain number of years before they declassify documents such as those. But for the Marshall Islands case in the 1990s, President Clinton authorized the declassification when there was a study that was going on for downwinders, and the Marshallese were also included in that study. So lots of documents were released, and many of them were reclassified. A lot of the documents that went out were redacted. They gave a cache of documents, and please correct me, Ambassador or Benedict, I know that they gave a cache of documents to the embassy in Washington, D.C., and Tina worked on those. And my understanding is they basically were just kind of dumped there. Tina, would you like to? I just realized, oh yeah, Tina actually worked on those when those were released. But it is fraught because there's supposed to be a system in place, but it's not always followed. put her on the spot.
Yahweh, hello everyone. Yes, there were documents given both to the embassy and the Nuclear Claims Tribunal also as well. Mary, who is here, the ambassador's wife, worked with those documents in the Marshall Islands that we then put together a nuclear institute at our College of the Marshall Islands and to house those documents. And many people have gone through those documents, and as you said, they are redacted, but much information came out as a result of that declassification. Wherein under the compact that the US had with the Marshall Islands, the first compact, there was an agreement that was a part of that compact called the 177 Agreement, which is to address the consequences of the nuclear testing period. However, that compact was agreed in the 1980s without the benefit of facts contained in those classified documents. And as April has said, these documents that were declassified, while heavily redacted, clearly showed new information that was not known at the time of the signing of that compact. And that new information particularly spoke to the extent of the effects, for example, that instead of just having affected the 4 atolls that the US says were affected by the testing, and we've heard about those, Bikini, Eniwetok, Rongelap, and Utrecht, that in fact the extent of the fallout was across the entire Marshall Islands. We also learned, for example, that there were many other chemicals dumped in Eniwetok and Bikini. In addition to radioactive waste, we also are hosting waste that were brought in from other testing sites in the United States mainland, from other testing sites. So they were put onto ships, and those were shipped out to the Marshalls, and those were dumped in those lagoons. So there's a lot of new information. The Marshall Islands government then put together what was called a change circumstances petition, which is why this is when I got involved. This was in the 2000s. There's a provision in our agreement with the US that says if circumstances change, you can go to the US Congress. Well, actually, you can go, yes, well, particularly to the US Congress. You can go to the US Congress and ask for additional assistance, which the Marshall Islands did. We put together that petition based on those new documents, also based on extensive consultations in our communities, and new scientific evidence that has since come to light about the effects of radiation. And that was presented in 2001. And it didn't go anywhere. It has not been taken up. And now here we are. It's 2025, so that was in 2001. And so I think the case that circumstances change is very clear. However, it's not a court type of system. It has to be heard. The petition has to be heard by those who are sitting in those seats in the US government. And unfortunately, that hasn't happened.
Thank you, Tina. So we do have the benefit of having Tina Stege, the RMI Climate Envoy, and International Liaison for MEI. We want to claim her as well. Tina was the MC for the first nuclear remembrance event that we held back in 2014. But I wanted to thank the panelists. We do have a reception. I would like for you to take advantage of all of these wonderful minds in this room and ask questions. I know we don't have a whole lot of time to continue asking questions of the panelists, but hopefully they'll stick around for a few minutes. We have the room until 4:30, but we do have a reception there at the back, so please stay. Also just wanted to recognize and mention a couple of things before we go. So we have some posters in the back and some paintings that Marshallese youth have painted. We have a couple of posters about the nuclear legacy, about MEI, and then on your seats there's a postcard of a mural that was painted by Marshallese youth back in 2021. The artist names are on the back. Also, there's a QR code, and if you shoot that with your camera on your phone, it will take you to our website. We created a small page for today, but it also includes some photographs from people of Utrecht from 1970, I think 77, 78, that Glenn Alkley graciously shared with us. They were beautiful images, and I thought people should see those. And then some quotes curated by Corinne Salter with MEI, also curated from Glenn's website, atomicatolls.com. But I also just finally, let's give another round of applause for our panelists. And I want to say thank you to all of our friends who came locally, who came from other states, who came from, and I shouldn't do this because I'll miss people, from Kiribati in the front row, Mr. Ambassador Sito, a good friend of MEI and of the Marshallese people. Obviously from the Marshall Islands, but also we have folks from Australia, Kazakhstan, and South Korea with us who just came from Arkansas. So we're very happy and pleased that you're with us. And finally, I wanted to recognize the MEI staff. I think you've met pretty much everyone. They've had a role today. Also Marino. You haven't met Marino. He's been in the back, but he is with MEI. So if you all could stand up so everyone could see you. Corinne, Benedict, you all know. Marino, Matthew, and the lovely Marcina in the back. Thank you, everyone, for coming.